Hey folks, we're standing in the orchard today. It's March of 2025, and today we're going to be discussing why I'm choosing to convert this little 3-year-old orchard into a food forest. We're going to break the video into two parts, one in which I discuss the personal context of why I've decided to make that choice. And in the second video, we're going to be talking about the environmental reasons that I'm choosing to go with a food forest instead of a traditional orchard, particularly in gardening here in East Tennessee. So stay tuned. Now, I've chosen to talk about context, personal context first, because I think it's important to recognize that every gardener has a personal context. We are all gardening from a different set of capabilities, different life circumstances. And in my case, it's important to recognize the physical limitations that I have. And I know many of you out there can probably relate to that because there are a lot of us out there in the world who have some kind of health issue or physical limitation that makes gardening a little more challenging to us than it might be to other people. In my case, this has to do with the fact that I'm a cancer survivor. And my purpose in telling you about this is not to garner any sympathy. I have had 14 extra years of life, and I have 2 functioning legs. And that's a lot to be really grateful for. And so I'm not here to tell you my woes on the internet. It's merely to give you a context of why I believe a food forest is going to work better for me than traditional tilling. So 14 years ago, I was diagnosed with cancer, and I had a long flat tumor in my leg that ran between the muscle and the bone. And the important part to know about that, without going into too many details, is I did go through some traditional cancer treatments, including radiation and surgery, and those things have left me with chronic pain. And the radiation left me with nerve damage. It left me with bone loss and arthritis. And the surgery itself, they had to cut through the entire muscle in order to take the cancer out. And this is important in the context of gardening because when it comes down to it, I can't till. Like, physically speaking, I cannot till. Um, the physical punishment of using a rototiller, of using a hoe for hours on end, is just not something that is feasible for me. So it doesn't make sense for me to tear up a plot of land and spend a lot of really hard work planting it and spend the entire season hoeing and tilling in order to maintain bare ground around my plants, and then turn around and do it all again next year. The physical consequences for me in pain are not good. When I overexert myself, sometimes I can get in a pain cycle that can put me down for anywhere from 3 to 10 days. So even though I look like a pretty healthy human being, I've got this invisible malady, you might say, that prevents me from gardening in more traditional ways. And I have tried the last 3 years to do it. And in the last 3 years, my garden has been a mess. So really, it comes to me making a shift and looking at what I can really do. So in a food forest, we're trying to mimic nature. right? Well, nature doesn't go till up the ground every year and plant new things. Um, Instead, I can plant something once, right? It still hurts for me to use a shovel. But if I go and plant a blueberry once, that's the only time I have to do it, right? I don't have to dig that blueberry up every year. So for me, working with perennials makes more sense, and filling in the spaces in between my trees and my orchard, and for example, having an apple tree and then a blackberry and then another apple tree, and then planting other perennials around that I can simply plant once and maintain. For me, having physical limitations, that makes so much more sense. And I think for a lot of people out there, there's a lot of people who probably want to garden who just simply feel like they can't because the physical toll is too much. And I would like to encourage you to really consider alternative ways that you can still garden, right? You can still go and plant a blueberry and a rhubarb and make what's called like a guild around a fruit tree and make it almost entirely perennials, and then add in a few annuals that will reseed, and you have yourself something that now you only have to maintain. And for me, that makes a lot of sense. Now, don't think for 1 minute that I'm over here thinking that a food forest is going to be easy. I've gardened before. I know it's hard work. I've already been planting onions, planting irises. I've been working things into the ground here over the last few weeks. And I know gardening is still hard. I know it's still work. I don't think that a food forest is going to be this easy cure-all where I'm going to put something in the ground and then ignore it and never weed and everything's going to be happy. But I think that a food forest is a really good alternative, and I'm going to be doing my best to keep the ground covered with mulch and organic matter so that my weeding is cut down. And I'm also going to be trying to fill the spaces as much as possible so that those plants take over that space and weeding isn't necessary. And those are the things I'm working towards. And this year, in my first year of doing this, my entire goal is to just get the bones of it in. I'm just trying to get at least one large perennial in between every tree, whether it's a bush cherry, a blueberry, asparagus, artichokes. I'm just trying to get the basic perennials that'll come back every year into the ground so that I can begin that process of maintaining them and building a food system that I don't have to rebuild every year. So, if you're considering whether or not a food forest is the right sort of model for you, you might also want to be looking at your personal context and what you're personally capable of, what your goals are, um, any of that, because the gardener matters. The gardener matters in the garden, because at the end of the day, even though this video and this YouTube channel has an audience out there in the world, when it comes down to it, this garden has an audience of me and my family. And the things I grow here are for that audience. And so when you're making space for the plants and animals in the garden, make sure that you're also doing it with the space for you, right? Because you're a creature in that garden. and so is one of my cats who's trying to get in the shot right now. But the point is, you have to look at personal context, right? Not every gardening model is going to fit every gardener. And so I'm not suggesting that every person should do this, but what I am saying is that if you're like me and you have other limitations, then this might be the way to go. What are you doing, silly girl?